So Arthur Danto, upon seeing the Brillo boxes by Andy Warhol for the first time, declares there and then that the official end of art has arrived. That after a lifetime of attempting to represent things, art has reached a conclusive end in the realization that the mode of art takes place in the level of ideas as opposed to visual form. You could trace this back to Kant's Copernican revolution, whereby the subjects inherit slanting of objective reality into the subjectivist gaze, apprehends our ability to posit true claims about the objective reality altogether. And if that's to be the case, then the realistic painter, in their attempts at depicting reality visually on a canvas, was to be relegated to the stuff of Christmas cards and kitsch decorations. There were murmurings around the seams, of course, leading up to the Brillo boxes. Duchamp's anti-art gesticulations, Malevich's black square, formalist reductionism, where paint and sculpture ceased dressing itself up to be in reality in an era where photography was widely dispersed. You could also say that by the time you get to painting something like a maximalist black void, that there really is nothing left to be painted. We've reached an end in terms of content, but with the Brillo boxes, we've even reached an end in terms of form. It's the same reason why art schools now prescribe to their students that no matter how abstract and anti-representational paintings get, it is to be fundamentally limited. To quote conceptual artist Paul McCarthy, it is to be locked in the rectangle of the canvas. Exact same reason why Jeff Koons' earlier works, directly inspired by Salvador Dali and Surrealism, garnered the lowest reviews of his career compared to his later, more famous, withdrawn compositions. These earlier works still harken to a time where the artists daubed paint onto canvas, naively buying into their own creations, allegedly. But no matter what form and internal gesticulations within the art world, those outside of the art world cognoscenti would deem all of this to be just a massive, indecipherable drivel, that the artist in its current format is something like a non-essential worker, famously posited in the Sunday Times survey during COVID lockdowns. The artists of old, however naively, in their attempts at speaking to the objective reality, using the visual language of the shared collective knowledge base, was at least subservient to the audience's visual senses. You could hardly say that Da Vinci was non-essential. Artists were firmly lodged onto the material reality, artistic skill a prerequisite to bardic gratification. But with the Copernican revolution, you saw an inversion where it was now the audience that was sucked into the artist's personal iconography. This was something predicted by American philosopher John Dewey, who wrote in the book Art as Experience all the way in the 1930s, that the artist will grow increasingly separated from society with technological and communication advancements. The artist will eventually gallivant under separateness, even exaggerating eccentricity for the sake of identity actualization, leading to the exact type of narcissism that you see today. Another watershed moment is the Scream by Edward Munch, followed by 2 world wars, horrific human rights atrocities, and a Nietzschean death of God as modernism reared its ugly head and made beauty something of a tactless concept. As Adorno says, to write poetry after Auschwitz was barbaric. But it's been nearly 100 years since these exceptional circumstances, and yet art is as removed from beauty as it's ever been. Instead of asking if an art piece is beautiful enough, like we once did with aesthetic discussions, we now ask if an art piece is indeed art at all. There are a myriad of reasons as to why the arts kept to this trajectory more than other domains, to the benefit of the likes of Jeff Koons, Damien Hirst type artists, those who commission craftspeople to make their ready-mades for them, relying on their wealthy associates to ensure that their works never go unbidded for, whilst the wealthy themselves are incentivized towards the works being made faster at a lower quality than ever, making it easier than ever to exploit any individual within the arts for money laundering, tax evasion, and income roundly. The critics are incentivized towards intellectualizing these aesthetics for the sake of reinforcing their status as the cultural intelligentsia, the elite few who can see what others can't comprehend. Jed Pearl famously called this laissez-faire aesthetics, that the openness to interpretation in the art world makes it the stomping ground for the financial elite as opposed to the artistic, as it's much easier to regurgitate structural theory than it is to learn how to paint or draw adequately. With other domains struck by postmodernism, you at least have something like a teleological demand that keeps the margins from widening too much. With postmodern architecture, no matter how fanciful the forms get, it still has to stand upright as a building and not fall apart at the seams. It still has to function structurally in that manner. With postmodern literature, it still has to arrive in something akin to a book, using sparser language perhaps to depict its content. But with the arts, there's no such ontological remit. It really is just boundless. And think too to how something like experimental music, if you played it in a crowd, it may constitute a noise disturbance. Those who can't stand the auditory assault may just get up and turn it off. Whereas with experimental art, they're more or less free to petulantly and iconoclastically destroy what they desire, as the pretense there is that you're free to just turn away and walk out of the gallery, as many do. When all is up for grabs in terms of meaning, then you leave ample room for the ego to project onto the world of Hegel's Enttäuschung. John Dewey's premonition of a narcissistic artist has been fulfilled and dead so. With the death of God, religious instinct is free to run riot. In some cases, the self becomes God, like with many modernist paintings. Kirchner's self-portrait as a soldier. In painting himself as a soldier returning home from the war, even though he served as a driver and never actually fighting anyone. In amputating his hands, this was to symbolize the artist as the soldier who could no longer serve, a Gnostic martyr. There was, of course, also Tatlin's ill-fated tower, commissioned by the Communist International. They wanted a building that symbolized their communist beliefs, but this was never actually made, as it was designed with no regard for the material reality and was therefore functionally impossible. So draw your own parallels with communism. Abstract artists had a tendency for writing supplementary manifestos and statements positioning themselves as apostles, Gnostic bearers of divine truths, mapping onto theosophical concepts like ascended masters and Mahatmas who we should just listen to, even if their visual language makes no linguistic sense. It's on us to bridge the gap due to their superior spiritual enlightenment to us. This was a very pervasive attitude amongst the architects at the time, who audaciously declared themselves the master builders, who held the keys to the cosmopolitan utopia being unlocked, and so we should all just get out of their way so they could get these gold nuggets out of their hand to guide us into the future. Once again, many of their designs never actually got off the ground because they were functionally impossible, and a few that were made have been fairly conclusively proven by placemaking studies to have a negative impact on the mental and emotional well-being of those living in the vicinity. So as you can see with architecture, it's still treated as objectivist mainly. There's a lot of pushback against ugly buildings being built, probably due to their intrusive nature on people's lives. But with the arts proper, there's no such self-correcting mechanism. It really is just fractionated individualism and every pagan god with their respected mythologies and canon for themselves. In many cases, we've constructed such a web of theoretical propositions that it's hard to break out of it without there being pushback. Post-structuralists made the cry that the representational enterprise is antiquated for being bound by construction still. Think to the death of the author by Roland Barthes. They may invoke Exodus 24's "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image." This is to say that to depict anything is to essentially relegate the highest ideals down to our profane lived experience. To dare say anything on things like beauty or love is to review a prejudicial authoritarian reflex still bound by relativity. There's to be no individualism, only dominant epistemes and reifying power games. The pragmatist will of course say to this that in spite of the gaps between representation and referent, that many representations have served us well up to now as a means of communication and bricolage for thought and emotion. Think to the word green for the color it refers to. It could have nominally been any other word. It could have been red or another random arrangement of letters, but it's been sufficient for description thus far, and so we should waste no time amending that. The more humanist thinkers will say of something like beauty that beauty is a universal concept even if slanted into different perspectives by different cultures, whether it be a layered Caravaggio chiaroscuro behind glass in a museum or a tribal Congolese textured fiber cloth designed to be felt, that there's a sense of preferred placement, a feeling for the divine order of forms is shared. This is classical integral theory, the idea that culture emerges from the same base properties. And the science would largely back this up. Aesthetic studies demonstrate that when subjects are asked to rank order art pieces based on metrics like beauty, composition, subject matter, placement, that they demonstrate great uniformity, even cross-culturally. So art is a lot more objective than we give it credit for, or want to give it credit for. It is at least transjective in metamodernist terms. The art that we've traditionally associated with being good or beautiful is still that which the vast majority of people find to be good or beautiful,
in spite of what the tabula rasa types buy into, the post-classical battalion who encourage unlearning how to paint or draw.
To, as they say, go back to a time where we drew or painted like a child again.
They often neglect the fact that actual children tend to be more impressed by displays of rendering realism, it seems.
Think back to early school time art classes where whoever gets their shading down garners the most plaudits. The art that we instinctively believe to be good or beautiful is still that which speaks to people the most, which should be seen as a beacon of hope. That the two-way street of old, that which allowed great artists to be great artists, still exists. Those with such ambitions will of course see this as an antidepressant, but there are also those who see any prospects of objectivity as something to be fearful of. Every time I talk about these things from this angle, or I see someone else talk about these things from this angle, it yields a painfully predictable retort in the comments section on everything from a Megan Gafford blog post to an Eric Wayne article. There's an appeal to personal subjectivity or relativity roundly. Why does the arts garner such an abundance of these kinds of comments? Besides the market force explanations I outlined, there's also Isaiah Berlin's inner citadel, that when you can't attain what you want, you teach yourself to want what you had. It's a Nietzschean slave morality, or in the kids' lingo, copia. We all, on some level, want to be artists, and when rules are constructed in our way, we're inclined to cripple and denigrate such rules to maintain the vague role of the artist sat atop the Maslow's pyramid, that which symbolizes the rediscovery of the child stage in psychological development of reward for mastery.
It is all these successful adults who, upon mastering their domain, start imposing more of themselves in their work to, as they say, see more of themselves in their work. It is the millionaire who, upon making bank and attaining clear stability, becoming able to do daft things like narrating audiobooks and other creative endeavors.
It's George Bush quite literally bracketing himself as a painter after his presidency had ended.
It is the penetrating example of the parent who, after a lifetime of attempting mastery of the self and environment, is able to see the world through the eyes of the child again, through their literal children.
It's of course also the musician who, with the chord changes deeply embedded, able to dance across the fretboard, to truly play. So the shared desire to be an artist is really just a shared desire for adolescence of poor determinist as an archetype of play, of reward for a lifetime of mastery and sacrifice, but for many, save the labor and sacrifice. To demand its reward without any prerequisite is therefore narcissism, a freezing at the messianic stage of Piagetian development. It is the young adult who declares that their dream in life is to be an artist, knowing nothing about the arts, so really just a demand to prolong their youth. It is that essence which is captured in freshmen at art schools who can't pick a direction, genre, or specialty to focus on. They insist that they can still be and do everything. It is that which is echoed by the adults who think they were better at more things as a child, when really just looking back through the lens of potential, as does tend to happen with children, where more doors are open to them.
Thus, this new age obsession with things like fluidity, really just a devil's bargain that leaves you with nothing.
So you can so say that this self-aggrandizement that you see in the arts is really just a reflection of a society remedying meaninglessness with increased egotism. Jean Twenge's research in the narcissism epidemic demonstrates a rise in narcissistic personality inventory traits and diagnoses in cluster B personality disorders. With the role of the artist sat in the higher Maslowian, there's far less of a limit going upward than there is going downward, which more or less ends in death. Coupled with laissez-faire aesthetics, God complexes really know no limit. But just because you're useless and dysfunctional doesn't make you an artist, and thinking so speaks to a deeply rooted lack of respect towards the role, which was once considered more essential than it is now. I loved what G. Gebser wrote in The Ever-Present Origin, about how the artist traditionally has a knack for anticipating perceptual shifts in society.
This is done via tapping into the unconscious, perhaps. They do this sometimes decades in advance.
Think to how the Cubists, with their nonlinear time, predated post-classical narratology and Alan Watts popularizing Eastern philosophy in the West.
It is Dada and the new genre artists predating postmodern gesticulations with categories and new media convergence phenomena.
It is Guy Debord and the Situationist Derrida predating Deleuze's concepts of resistance.
So in our murky times, you can so say that the artist has a crucial role in guiding us out of this malaise, though you could also say that we drove us into this ditch in the first place.
And you do see in all the other creative domains that there's a reorientation, a rediscovery of the sacred, a return to the divine, most notably with the new Sincerity movement in literature.
And even the staunchest of Marxists are now making humiliating concessions within their internal dialogue about the utility of things like
religion and patriotism and mobilizing the proletariat, some even to a return to free speech as a virtue in a second dawning era of Trump where clearly Marcusean repressive toleration tactics have failed yet again. The battle has to be won on symbolic grounds through debate and discourse. You can say then that the spectre of Stuart Mill haunts such spaces. We're always looking back on people throughout history in our past and thinking they were so stupid to have thought what they did. But more than likely, they were thinking the same about people in their past, with stupidity being a constant through line. It would be wise to assume that we're doing some things that are stupid as well, so to not be cosmically arrogant. And I say that the dislodging entirely of things like beauty and classical aesthetics
is one such act of stupidity. Yes, their constructed mechanisms have not been perfect.
And yes, something like beauty may have been mythologized a tad, but we can make it better so that it can become an ideal again. That it still speaks to people should be seen as a beacon of hope, that we have anything at all that can guide us out of this malaise. All around us you see art that purports to speak to the marginalized, to empower the minority voice, and yet insist upon this atomized iconography that really only just speaks to the rich. On a practical level, co-opting lower base needs for higher base ends, to claim to speak to community needs when really just gratifying the self, to appeal to cultural relativity when merely individual relativism. And the telltale signs are that the purported groups just don't speak this language. This was talked about way early in the avant-garde movement, back when they still kind of had a point compared to now, by sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. In his research, he showed that the working classes still preferred meat and potatoes realism and classical beauty, whilst the avant-garde pieces were purchased by the rich, who purchased them to signal that they're not just rich, but they're the intellectual artistic elite as well. So the will to life and beauty draws not just ontological cowardice, but it signals affluence as well. Where once the harshness of reality and communal interconnectedness compelled something like a triadic Hegelian structure, with affluence shielding you, one can delay maturation and avoid the punishing consequences of your incompetence.
The will to life draws cowardice in the same way beauty draws desecration. Beauty exposes ugliness, so we desecrate it to avoid its judgment.
But it is here to stay. It is that which is present throughout all of our history, even in our darkest moments. It is in the modernist literature written in and around 2 world wars. Even in the absence of beauty, it is implied through its absence. Even in the depiction of horrific human encounters, still with an eloquence to implore that we make a return one day. It is in the concentration camp members who insisted on making music, smuggling musical instruments into the camp to make their compositions out of love for the craft. It is in Anne Frank's final diary entries, still maintaining the belief that humanity was good at heart. And we've largely not kept our promise to them, that which is sacrificial and redemptive, that which is the long-standing traditional responsibility of all artists to humanity. Laissez-faire aesthetics opened the gates to barbarians, and so we should erect them up to keep them out again, through artists taking artistic skill seriously again, and critics being well-read and maintaining proper distinctions. Yes, there are exceptions to every rule, but the exceptions do not become the rule, and the margins do not tyrannize, not this inorganically anyways.
We're living in a time where beauty and classical aesthetics deserve more symbolic capital and underscoring than their exceptions.
The bar for being a great artist has never been lower. There are many who have deliberately hamstrung themselves and lowered the standards, so if you want to be a great artist, get out there and make something beautiful.